What's up? So, haven't made a post here in a while, but I came across an interesting article that I wanted to critique, since I'm such a critic or whatever, but always criticizing other people. But so I'm browsing through Facebook, as I often do, and there's a page called Anarchism, which is clearly socialist leaning. But they posted a link to AMWEnglish.com. I'm not really familiar with that website, but it's clearly a bunch of what they would consider anarchist news articles and stuff like that. Clearly from what people would call a, quote, left anarchist view, for the most part, it seems. To me, that really doesn't make any sense. Left or right anarchism doesn't make any sense. And so that's going to be basically the basis of this critique. Or at least where I'm coming from, as I consider myself an anarchist without adjectives. There we go. Or anarchist without hyphens, just an anarchist. Communists call me an anarcho-capitalist. I prefer market anarchist or free market anarchist, or just anarchist. So the first sentence. Revolutionary Anarchism Against Democracy was the headline, so it piqued my interest, right? I was like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Like, yeah, sure, all anarchists are against democracy philosophically, because when we talk about democracy, what we usually mean is the state, right? And it's a farce. Democracy is, I guess, fine. Philosophically, it's fine if it's in a voluntary setting, like if you guys make a workers' co-op or a commune or something, and you use democracy to decide what's going on. It's fine if everything's voluntary. The problem with the state is that it's not voluntary. That's really the problem. It's not that, we don't have the vote or the votes are corrupted or anything like that. Vote is irrelevant. The fundamental philosophical argument against the state essentially is that it is involuntary. So the first sentence kind of blew my mind for reasons that might be obvious, but if they're not, they're going to be my first part of my critique. So the sentence is, it has come to the point at which which is already kind of poor grammar, right? Probably should be to which. It has come, well, I guess either way, whatever. It has come to the point at which the liberal tendencies within the anarchist movement in the U.S. have to be reckoned with by anarchist revolutionaries. And right off the bat, that sentence doesn't really make any sense, because if you're using liberal to mean what it actually means and not what authoritarian communists have changed it in most people's minds to me, the etymology of the word liberal, it comes from liberty. So, and that was the original, the quote, classical liberal movement was more along those lines of trying to get the state out of our lives, right? That was the whole point of it. And for some reason, I think leftists think liberals mean, I guess liberal is essentially tied to capitalism and free markets in a sense, but it's really just a philosophical case against the state. It doesn't matter what form the economy necessarily takes, as long as it's voluntary, as long as the state is not coercing people, and hopefully people aren't robbing each other and things like that. But so if you go by the etymology of the word, anarchists are the most liberal. They're even more liberal than what the movement called the classical liberals were, because they go even further and they say, if they're logically consistent, that we want the state to be gone immediately. We don't want a state. The state is immoral. So I don't know what they mean by the liberal tendencies within the anarchist movement in the U.S., because all anarchist movements are, by definition, liberal tendencies. They're extreme liberalism. It really that even really doesn't make any sense, because liberalism is liberalism, and it is extreme if you think that freedom is extreme, right? So, or liberty. And so then they go on. So right off the bat, though, their terminology is screwy. They're victims of the current propaganda that's infested most of the planet, which is this use of liberal to mean socialist, because they're clearly thinking that these liberal tendencies of getting, liberal means you want the government out of people's lives. It means you want a small government in the classical sense, but in the true definition of it and the history and the meaning of the word, anarchists would be the most liberal. So Their terminology is screwy, and they're falling victim to that. They think liberal means, well, what's interesting is that they kind of know what liberal means, I think, and they don't like it, but they consider themselves anarchists. But all liberal means is that you prefer liberty to state coercion, basically, or coercion in general. That would kind of be the anarchist, just right. But so then they go on, as an anonymous author. When Trump was elected in 2016, there came an influx of attention to anarchism, particularly through the corporate media fascination with anti-fascism. No, there really isn't an influx of attention to anarchism. There's an influx of attention to people dressed in black who run around smashing things. It's not like they're talking about anarchism. They're just like, look at these crazy anarchists, and most of those people really aren't. I would say most of them probably aren't actually anarchists. They don't really fully understand the philosophy. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that some of them do. So it's just interesting to me that the corporate media fascination with anti-fascism. There's so many things to unpack here. Like, first of all, most of what those groups that they're talking about do are kind of along the lines of fascism. Like, if you go and you shut down a guy from talking because you don't like his ideas, even if his ideas are as crazy as fascism, or even just outright saying, let's bring slavery back, attacking him makes you a fascist. You can't just attack someone for having insane ideas. When they try to implement them, then okay, then you defend yourselves or stop them before they implement them if they're a serious threat. But like shutting down Milo or whatever his name was years ago, and when they try to do this, it's just, that's nonsense. You're wasting time. You're being led astray to go focus on some media clown yourselves. What's he really got? He's not an agent of the state, and lots of people go around talking about how the state should do this and the state should do that, and most of it is oppressive. So why would you just attack Milo instead of going to some Democrat's speech or something like this? You guys might talk on the internet about how you don't agree with them, but you guys don't go after them like you go after the so-called right-wingers. And not that I agree with Milo or any of that, or the alt-right or the fascists or the nationalist socialists or anything like that. It's just there seems to be a double standard there. But and also, like I said, they're not really giving attention to anarchism. They're giving attention to some groups who are smashing stuff up, and maybe they'll say, "Oh, the anarchists are at it again," but they don't go any further than that. And really, you're doing a disservice to the philosophy, because you're acting like fools to begin with. You're not really doing anything productive when it comes to the state. And the propaganda by the deed and all that stuff you guys talk about, okay, whatever. But I don't think that college speeches and some Bank of America, though I think Bank of America is essentially a corrupt institution, especially since it was bailed out by the government and everything, or by the state rather, the federal government as they call it. That doesn't mean that I think what you're doing is productive. It's not productive, especially when most people already still believe in the state. They're just going to want the police to go and smash you guys, and it reaffirms their belief that, yeah, we need the police to keep these crazy anarchists in check. It would be anarchy without the state, and yada, yada, yada. So you're kind of falling into a trap and living up to a stereotype that they've cast upon you by doing that stuff, and that's not the way the state's going to come apart anyway. I'm not saying that certain tactics wouldn't hurt the state or help the state to dissolve, but you guys are small potatoes, unfortunately. And I'm not necessarily saying that as an insult. It's just it's the truth. They don't care that you guys dress in black and go smash stuff. Yeah, they'll stop you because they need to keep the facade of property rights and everything else, but they don't care about anybody's property rights. That's what makes them who they are. They don't care that the worker got robbed or whatever. They robbed the worker through taxes. They don't care that the capitalist got robbed. They robbed the capitalist through taxes too. So, the general capitalist. Obviously, there are some that are bad with this whole situation, but so there's just so much nonsense just in these first. That was only 2 sentences. So rather than viewing corporate media as an enemy, now it's in the article, certain anarchists delighted in the newfound attention, ever since they have pursued a strategy of drawing media attention to themselves by watering down anarchist idea to make them appealing to a liberal audience. Again, that doesn't make any sense. Anarchists are the most liberal in political philosophy. They want no state. We want no state. That is the most liberal position you could possibly take. And your economic, I think what they're doing is they're tying in this economic aversion to capitalism or the concept of a market that they have, and they're lumping that in with liberal. And yes, historically, that was the movement, but if we follow the movement through logically, where should it be? It should be with the anarchists, because that's where we would keep going if you want the government to be out of your life. Well, why not entirely? And then they come in with the rationalizations about, well, who's going to protect us and all this nonsense. So, but the problem here is that these people are not watering down anarchist ideas. They are not anarchists. When they go on television or wherever they're going on the internet and talking about how we need minimum wage and we need to abolish capitalism, like, none of those have anything to do with anarchism, regardless of what communist books you've read, and regardless of how close some communists like Bakunin and Tolstoy mostly were very close to anarchists. For the most part, but there's still, just like with the so-called founding fathers, there's that little bit left that they don't really seem to get. So they're not watering down the ideas of anarchism. They're not talking about anarchism. Like, they might say the word and then they'll say, and that's why we need to abolish capitalism. Well, how are you going to abolish capitalism without a centralized state? What you need to do, in my opinion, at that point is you need to look into von Mises, and you need to look into the concept of spontaneous order and things like that, because we've been talking about those things for years. That's how you will, quote, abolish capitalism. What's going to happen is it's going to happen through market means. People are going to be fed up. They're going to stop working for other companies. But the problem is those opportunities are taken away by the state, mostly, not the capitalists. Though the percentage of capitalists that work with the state to take them away, then that works. But licensing, patents, regulations, obviously taxation, centralized monopolized currency, inflation, the Federal Reserve, that is what is taking away the opportunity for individuals to be self-sufficient. That is what is centralizing capital to the state and then to all of these corporations that it then gives billions of dollars of your money to. So they're not watering down anarchism to make them more appealing to a liberal audience. Liberals do not want to raise the minimum wage or to get rid of private property or anything like that. So it's weird that I don't understand what they would possibly be thinking that they were saying, that they were watering down anarchist ideas to make them appealing to a liberal audience, even by their own view. Because, to them it's abolish property and all of this stuff, which, how are you going to water that down to make them appealing to a liberal audience? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Liberals don't want to get rid of property, like, even by your own stance. But then earlier they used liberal in a different kind of way. It seems strange. But so then this says, this means de-emphasizing the militancy of anarchism and instead equating anarchism with, quote, direct democracy. Now, okay, here's kind of a valid point, is that anarchism and direct democracy have nothing to do with each other, because direct democracy, again, is just another proposition for how to organize a state. And so we don't want a state. So direct democracy, representative democracy, quote, democracy as a whole, none of those things have anything to do with anarchism. So, right, to equate anarchism with direct democracy would be false. But now they directly go back on, they started to make sense, and then their next sentence makes no sense. From this viewpoint, anarchism is nothing more than the radical extreme of liberalism. It is. Anarchism is the, quote, radical extreme of liberalism, the people who wanted small government. Anarchism is the next push. When you realize that the state is entirely illegitimate, you become an anarchist. And but what's interesting is that, what does direct democracy have to do with liberalism? Again, like, liberals don't want direct democracy. Liberals want free markets. Even though the word has been turned into basically meaning authoritarian socialist, even these communists, these anarcho-communists and stuff, they say that's their problem with liberals, is that they are la petite bourgeoisie, or they still believe in capitalism or something. So how the hell would you think that direct democracy is going to appeal to liberals? Like, you're not understanding what liberalism is. You're thinking it's the Democratic Party and all of these crazy parliamentary politic people, which they're not. Anarchists are the most liberal. Quote, this approach is dangerous because it plays into the counterinsurgent strategy of the state, allowing supposedly radical ideas to be co-opted by democratic socialist politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. No, I don't know who out there thinks that AOC has anything to do with anarchism, or that her ideas are radical in any other way other than, yo, you're insane because you want the government all up in everybody's ass and you want this huge government to spend all this money and tax all these people and yada, yada, yada. And then you're pondering whether people should be having babies or whatever. It's like, you should be sent off on a boat immediately. Person in political power should never be talking about that. What's the next step? But so anyway, no. The approach is dangerous because direct democracy has nothing to do with liberalism. And because, I don't know how a person could think that somehow anarchism has been co-opted into the words of AOC. Like, nothing AOC says has anything to do with anarchism. It doesn't even come close. Nowhere, anywhere in the press or anywhere else, I'm sure, has AOC ever said anything that sounds like anarchism. Sure, she's drawn light to some corruption in the government, like many, many people have before her, like Ron Paul, who basically laid this entire thing out over a course of a couple decades and, never really got any credit for it. But, no, AOC and anarchism are complete opposites, which these people probably even recognize that too, as they're basically saying here, but it's not because that AOC is a radical liberal. Like, AOC is not a radical extreme liberal, guys. AOC is an authoritarian socialist, like every other politician that has ever existed. So I don't understand how they're linking all of this craziness together in this article, but it doesn't make any sense, because the radical extreme of liberalism would be the people who want small government taken to the extreme, which would then be no government. So yeah, like, you can say you want no government and that's fine. So in that case, even if you consider yourself a socialist, if you really understand what a state is and you don't want there to be, then politically you are a liberal. That is what the word and the history means, and it is. So, or at least was the first step. Liberalism was, what about the government shouldn't do certain things? The government shouldn't be allowed to do certain things. And then it was the government should be out of our lives and we should have more freedom to decide what we do in economics and stuff like that. And then if you keep going, the radical extreme of that would be, let's not have a state at all. So, continuing on. As revolutionary anarchists in the U.S., our primary enemy is the white supremacist state. Okay, white supremacist really didn't have to be in there because it's the state. As an anarchist, your primary philosophical opponent is the state, or someone who wants there to be a state. Continuing, whose ideology of liberal democracy is in many ways indistinguishable from fascism. And now we have gone completely off the rails into total nonsense territory, because, okay, so you're telling me that white supremacists believe in liberal democracy, and that in many ways it's indistinguishable from fascism. Clearly this person just has no idea what they're talking about, and they're just repeating words. I'm sure they mean well, but they clearly do not have a very solid footing in political science or philosophy, because, if we're going to use liberal democracy again to mean the classical liberals, that is nothing like fascism, guys, except for the fact that they are statists. But a fascist state is way more intrusive than what, like, the founding fathers and Jean Locke and Rousseau and these people believed in. And those were the liberals. Those were the first people who were like, people have the freedom to choose and should have the freedom to choose, and they should have the freedom to have property and so on. That's what liberal means, okay? So this sentence is just complete insanity. they're mixing up all types of words. Okay, liberal democracy is only indistinguishable from fascism in the same way that authoritarian communism is indistinguishable from fascism, and that's the sense that they both believe in a monopoly on violence, that is a state. So, it's not really in many ways, it's in a few ways, and in one very important fundamental way are they indistinguishable. The same way all states are indistinguishable fundamentally. They're all monopolies on violence and such. So, the U.S., continuing, the U.S. slaughtered millions around the world in the name of democracy, okay? Anarchists have fought throughout history for a revolution that would completely destroy the state and capitalism. Okay, well, we could have just stopped at the state, but whatever. You want to live on a commune, or you think everything should be collectively owned, that's fine as long as you don't use violence to take other people's stuff. Who wasn't a thief, anyway? Of course, all capitalists are thieves to you guys, but whatever. Anyway, any attempt to secure reforms within the current system is ultimately destructive to the revolutionary goals of anarchism. Another way of saying that is that you're not going to vote your way to freedom, or the system can't be fixed from within. You're not going to go in and use the system to change itself because the system's primary goal is to sustain itself. And not only that, but logically it's impossible because obedience to the state's commands is compulsory. That was like, I'm going back, the problem is that it's involuntary. So, I don't really know about revolutionary goals. I don't really use that term, but, the goal is to abolish the state, is to get rid of the state. Parenthetical for you guys, and capitalism, or maybe even primarily and capitalism, but that wouldn't make any sense. Ultimately, using the system is counter to the concept of anarchism. The only saving possibility would be is if you were attempting, it would be a futile attempt, but attempting to at least get the state out of our lives, not raise the minimum wage, not tax everybody 90%, or, capitalists, or tax anybody, period. Calling for taxes is not what anarchism is. Obviously, that should be obvious. But basically, right, like using the state to try to reform itself is a person who doesn't really understand what a state is. So reforms only strengthen the position of the counterinsurgent. Basically, another way of saying that is that you are legitimizing the state apparatus by participating in its rituals, such as voting. So that's the way that I would say that. But we're basically kind of saying the same thing. So, continuing on, revolutionary anarchists in the United States are reaching a point at which militancy will have to intensify to support those targeted by the state. I don't see anything wrong with that inherently. And to attack the foundation of American white supremacy. Again, don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't really care if a person is racist. They can believe whatever nonsense they want as long as they're not violating the rights of other people. But I'm assuming that this person means the, quote, system. And sure, fine. So, continuing. We also need to make anarchist ideas as clear and appealing as possible. Yeah, that's an interesting sentence. Not by diluting the message into reformism. Right, because anarchism isn't about reforming the state, it's about abolishing it. But making it clear that we are fighting for freedom. What I would say is that we want to abolish the state. The state is immoral. That is what the problem here is. The state is a violent, immoral monopoly. The concept itself is self-contradictory and insane. But you can say it that way if you want. We're for freedom. Yes, we are. This means attacking and destroying the prisons that enslave millions and police who routinely murder black people throughout the country. Defending people from the system, yes. Attacking the prison, that's your choice. I wouldn't necessarily see anything wrong with that, other than you're probably going to lose until you get a force that is that can be reckoned with anyway by the massive military apparatus called the state. But ethically, right, like drug users who are in the cage, if you want to break them out, sure, completely consistent with anarchism. Running around just randomly attacking police, probably not, and probably not the best way to go about this unless, again, you have a superior force. But hey, it's your prerogative, and if you want to defend people from the police, of course, that's completely in line with freedom. The police are enforcing immoral laws. It's not immoral or illegitimate to defend people from this. I mean, think of Nazi Germany, right? Continue on. Anarchists should be firm in rejecting any attempts to turn anarchism into something that corporate media would find unthreatening. Well, right, but they have not done that. Again, going back, they have not done that. Nobody has taken anarchist ideas and transformed them through political jargon into what AOC says. Direct democracy has nothing to do with anarchism to begin with. Okay, so nobody has done that. Nobody is, not one politician there now today comes anywhere close to anarchism. Not even Rand Paul. Like, he's not an anarchist. Ron Paul was a little closer. But these people are not, like, how do you figure out? I don't even see how AOC was in here. The problem with this is that they think that communism and anarchism are the same thing. And so for them, in their mind, what has happened is that their communist ideas have been transformed into political propaganda, as it always is, because that's what it is, into AOC. And so they see similarities in what they believe, and they're thinking that that's anarchism, that they're co-opting and that they're trying to make more palatable. No, that's not what they're doing. I mean, that doesn't even make any sense, because even if they were doing that, that would be against their own system. Like, to take anarchism and try to repackage it to trick people into what? Into supporting it? Into agreeing with it? They're not doing that. Like, I don't know what this person is talking about. It's not making any sense. But they have not taken anarchist philosophy and attempted to make it into something unthreatening through AOC. AOC's ideas are threatening because she's a state worshiper and she's not an anarchist. And then they go on, the recent martyrdoms of, oh man, I'm probably going to mispronounce the first guy here. It says Tikoser Piling, in parentheses, Lorenzo Orsetti and Mikhail Zlobitsky, which, unfortunately, sorry guys, I don't know who that is. It's tragic if they were killed by the state, I'm sure. Provide examples for the seriousness with which anarchist revolutionaries should view this moment historically. Well, I mean, the state has been murdering people for thousands of years. So, you know, power to the people here, your comrades and stuff, but a sad fact of reality is that, you know, the state murders people every day. So I'm glad that you're waking up to this realization, I suppose. Anarchists are once again putting their lives on a line to attack the forces of nation states and fascists around the world. Well, I guess I maybe have to look into them. So, okay. So they fought the state and they died. That is unfortunate, because chances are they were probably in the right. But this is no different historically than any other moment. The state has been doing this since its conception. That's what it does. So rather than, in quote again the article, rather than shying away from militancy, we should seriously reflect on how we can escalate our tactics. Taking inspiration from the courage of anarchist martyrs, we can make it clear that anarchism is a threat to liberal and conservative politicians alike, and that anarchists can and will strike at the heart of American democracy until the last person burns. Now see, I can basically agree with these. Yes, anarchism is a threat to all politicians. That is why they have not co-opted it and tried to make it more palatable to people. Because even if they did that, underneath their propaganda would be anarchism. So people would still be accepting anarchism, but they would be calling it something else. And that's not what's happening. Because that's not, I mean, why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense. They're tricking people into supporting watered-down anarchism. No, they're not doing that. Watered-down anarchism is still a threat to them. What they're doing is they're tricking people into thinking government is freedom, as they always have. So, yes, anarchism is a threat to the power structure as a philosophy, yes. But, you know, as far as escalating your tactics, you know, quote, our tactics, your tactics, more like it, you know, that's up to you. That's your choice if you want to do that. That's not how the state is going to come to end. But, you know, if you're defending the innocent, then you're not doing anything wrong. So, but, you know, it's interesting that through all of this gibberish, essentially, you know, the last sentence makes sense. Yeah, anarchism is a threat to liberal and conservative politicians alike. But, you know, if we go back and we use liberal to mean full-on, etymologically what it is, anarchists are the liberals. So a liberal politician, it's like saying a libertarian politician. It's a contradiction in its truest definitions. But so that's a 30-minute rant on this. And, yeah. So this guy clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, unfortunately, in so many ways. Hopefully he figures it out and doesn't hurt any innocent people. Peace.